All right, we are live, and welcome to this Facebook takeover. Our very special guest is David. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
All right, first questions first. How do you pronounce your last name?
Yeah, no, that's one that often trips people up. It's pronounced Gaughran,
All
which
right.
yeah, it's fun hearing people guess, but it's Gaughran.
All right, I would have said Gaughran, so I'm glad I asked before I made a
Yeah.
mistake right out the door. So you write historical novels and science fiction, and you also are an indie warrior, I would say, helping indie authors reach readers through workshops, through your blogs, through your newsletter, and through several nonfiction books. And you are going to touch on all of that and more today. We've got 1 hour.
Yeah, totally. You can squeeze me dry like a lemon.
Okay. I've got my challenge. So just a quick reminder at the top that you can comment on this video with any questions. And if you comment and like this page, you are entered to win a copy of Strangers to Superfans. So nice big prize to anyone staying tuned, and we will tackle those questions as we go. So you really kindly wrote a blog post for us, and in that you mentioned that it was hard to get an agent when you first started aiming at traditional publishing. So can you kind of take us back to that moment in time and how it felt to be submitting your work, getting those rejections, and how you decided to react?
I don't know, Chrissy. It was a very dark place, I have to say. Like this is back in, I don't know, 2008 or 2009, something like that, when I started querying agents, and digital publishing hadn't really taken off, or at least I was unaware of it. There was already romance authors that were doing quite well with self-publishing and digital publishing,
Yep.
but I wasn't plugged into that world at all, so I didn't know anything about it. The only path that I knew about was the traditional one of querying agents and trying to get a publisher. And it's quite funny because I actually used to work in tech, and all my ex-colleagues were telling me to self-publish. And I was telling them, no, that's not what a serious professional author does. That's the last refuge of the desperate or the slightly mad, as self-publishing used to be viewed. Um, and so, I did the usual thing of, you try and find a list of agents in your genre, ones that represented historical fiction, the kind of stuff that I thought I was writing like. And I think the first query I sent off was to the agent of one of my favorite authors, who's Louis de Bernier, who wrote Catherine Corelli's Mandolin and Birds Without Wings. So I sent her a very amateur query, like thinking back to it, and a couple of pages of what I thought was a finished book was really a first draft. And she actually requested, I think she requested like a partial or a full or something. And I went straight out to the pub to celebrate, because this is the first query that I'd sent out. I had an agent requesting pages. And I thought, this was all going to be pretty easy, that the world was quickly going to recognize my genius and start festooning me with all sorts of garlands and awards and, giant piles of cash as well. And of course, that didn't happen at all. She read the next few chapters of the book and realized that it was, something that was completely half baked and not ready at all. But I didn't let that deter me, and I sent it out to lots more agents who all, rejected it too. But I think I was querying agents for maybe, I don't know, 18 months or something. I think I queried nearly every single agent who had an email address in the world. And I started getting better feedback as I went along, because I was working on the same book, trying to make it better based on some of the feedback that I was getting. And some of the agents then were starting to request the full book and starting to give me more personalized feedback. And then I got to a point, I think I was about 18 months into it, when I was starting to feel a bit weary about the whole process. When an agent who had requested the full book something like 6 months beforehand, and I'd pretty much forgotten about him, he came to me, he sent me an email, and he said something like, I hope you don't have an agent yet. Everyone in the office has read your book and we love it. And we'd really like you to be our next author. And I was obviously, jumping up and down. This is something I'd been, working for and dreaming for so long. And then he finished the email with something like, we're just closing our office for the Christmas holidays, so please give us a call in 3 weeks' time or something. And I was like, you're kidding me. Like, I've got to wait 3 weeks now to have this conversation that I dreamed about. But anyway, I'd already decided that, you know, I was on my way, and, you know, I was going to get a big fat publishing deal and all this kind of thing. And I think I spent that 3 weeks over Christmas celebrating and telling everyone who'd listen that I was about to be, you know, a really big deal. And, and then I called the agent. I think it was like the 2nd or 3rd week in January when he finally, you know, got back from the Bahamas or wherever he'd spent his Christmas holidays. And he changed his mind. I think he might have read it again, or maybe he got something else in the same niche. And he was just like, yeah, on second reading, it's not all that really. So, you know, I'm not interested. And I was like, oh, you got to be kidding me. It's not even like, you know, this needs another draft, or you need to, you know, kill off one of the characters or something. It was just like a flat no. I don't know. I don't know why exactly, but these things happen, you know, and talking and knowing what I know about the business now, like, you know, this kind of thing is not that unusual. There's just so many authors trying to get into those few slots that the smallest difference can, you know, tank your chances. Right. But, you know, after that kind of near miss, and after telling everyone that I pretty much had an agent, I didn't know what to do. I was kind of thinking of giving up, you know. So I was like, what's the point? Like, I've pushed this as far as I can. I'm not sure if I have it in me to write another book and go through this emotional ringer again, because it's I'm kind of envious of the younger self-publishers starting now who just went straight to self-publishing and never queried an agent, because they've never experienced this kind of the emotional ringer that you go through. Which I think actually stands to you in your career, in that it helps you, you know, develop a tougher skin and deal with the inevitable criticism and 1-star reviews and stuff. Yeah. But yeah, I just wasn't sure if I wanted to keep doing it, keep making myself miserable, you know. But I kind of pushed through that, and I started a second book, another historical novel, one that was a bit more commercial. It was part of it was set in America, had an American protagonist. It wasn't quite as niche and obscure. But after a few chapters, I just kind of hit a wall, and I was just like, what's the point? You know, the first tricky bit I got to in the book, I had no motivation to continue. Right. And I really was tempted to walk away and just do something else with my time. And then I started hearing about self-publishing. Like, it had been at the edge of my radar towards the end of when I was querying agents, but I didn't really know a lot about it. I still had a lot of myths in my head that, you know, you wouldn't get taken seriously if you self-published. You couldn't really, you know, become a best-selling author, or all the things that you dreamed about. It wasn't the path for me to realize those dreams. But then I started reading more about it and seeing all sorts of people who, like, hadn't come from traditional publishing, who had started from zero, you know, with no backlist, to suddenly self-publish, and no connections, no agent. And they were, you know, just putting out books every few months and slowly building up a career and making more and more money every month and reaching more and more readers. And then it started becoming real to me. So that's when I decided then just to experiment with self-publishing and throw out a couple of short stories, and see what happened.
That's quite the journey.
Yeah.
I feel like it gives some background on the warrior side of yourself, where you're kind of out there fighting the good fight, and for the books that you believe in. It's awesome.
Yeah, well, like, I think, like, when I started blogging and kind of campaigning on a few different author issues, I think there was a lot of people in the traditional side of the fence who maybe assumed that it, you know, I think they felt this with a lot of self-publishers when we were speaking out on certain issues, that it was motivated by some kind of bitterness, or, like, you know, some deep emotional scarring that maybe the query process had put us through. And, you know, maybe that is buried in there somewhere. Maybe I'll need years of therapy to kind of figure that out. But I don't think so. I think for me, the motivation, because I often ask myself, like, why do I bother, you know, standing up in that soapbox? Like, because you don't really get anything out of it. Like, it doesn't do anything for your career. It doesn't benefit you in any way. Yeah. It just eats up time and headspace from what you should be doing, which is writing more books. Right. But for me, I think, you know, this is going to sound a bit kind of like Oscar's speech or something, but I think what we do is very important. I think novels in particular, we're kind of showing someone a better way to be. You know, we're showing people like us facing challenges and making changes internally to become better people, to get what we want. It's not just about getting the girl or capturing the dragon's treasure. Like, a really great novel is about the internal change that a character or a hero has to go through to get what they want. And I think that's important. I think that the stories we tell are important. And I think contrasting that, the important role that I think writers and novels have in society, is that historically the writers have often been very, very poorly treated.
Yeah.
And I could see with self-publishing, once I got into it and kind of dropped my blinkers a little bit, I could see that this was an opportunity, and maybe it wouldn't last forever. Maybe it was just going to be a temporary window, but it was an opportunity for writers to grab back some of that power, and for more writers to be able to earn a living from their books. And I think that's a pretty noble cause. And when I see companies or people out there trying to scam the system or exploit writers, that it just pushes all my buttons.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, and I must admit, I started my career on the other side of that table. I was an agent assistant as my first job in publishing.
You might have rejected me a few times.
I really think I might. If you queried everyone and you have that stack. No, but it was awful. I just would come in, and every day there was this huge stack of probably 50 samples, and I had a form rejection letter that you would just sign your name at the bottom, and just nobody was getting in the door. And at the end of maybe a year of that, it's a soul-sucking experience on the other side as well. I'm like, I haven't written a book. What do I know about anything? I was a new kid in New York with an English degree. So who am I to say no to these people? It's a weird dynamic. The system is clearly broken on both sides.
Yeah, I don't think it works super well for anybody. I think, although, like, before I shed too many tears for agents and publishers, I think there is a big kind of asymmetry of power going on there. Like, the system works better for them than it does for authors, I think. But yeah. I don't think it works particularly well for agents or publishers. Yeah. And I think while the world of self-publishing is far from perfect and it has plenty of flaws and defects, I think an open system generally allows not just like more diverse voices to get out there, but just like, I think it broadens the base of how many people can earn a living from it. Right. Like the average, like you always hear these discussions about how much does the average writer make self-publishing versus traditional publishing, or how good is the average book or a traditionally published book versus a self-published one. I always think that's kind of a dumb question, because like I don't think anyone who's a true professional is ever aiming to be average, for starters. Right. But like, obviously the quality level in an open system is going to be lower on average than in a closed, curated system. But I don't think that question brings us anywhere interesting, to be honest.
Yeah, I completely agree. And even at the quote unquote lower end of that, success still is worth it. I just helped my uncle self-publish a family story, and to see like the excitement on his face as he signed copies and gave them to all the nieces and nephews, that's all he wanted. And why shouldn't he have that right? And there's a place for that. It has a purpose. That book will have meaning to each of us.
Yeah, and like we shouldn't dismiss those more personal milestones. Like I remember the first time I self-published something, like the first time you get a review from a stranger, the first time you get an email from a reader, the first time you get a royalty check of any kind. Like, these are really special moments. And like, it's amazing that more of us get to experience those now. Like, like 100 times more people probably get to experience those moments now than 10 years ago, which is really amazing.
Yeah. All right, so that's it for the inspiration part. Okay, I wanted to get a bit of a geography check, if you'll humor me. You are currently sitting in the evening. It's lunchtime here. Many indie authors are American. It's thought of as kind of this American phenomenon, or at least that's where it started in this current state of mostly ebook self-publishing. What is it like for you to be self-publishing outside of the vortex?
I don't think it makes a difference in one sense. Like, I was living in Sweden when I started self-publishing, and in between now and then I've lived in London, which is probably the center of European publishing, and then I've lived in Prague, which probably isn't, and it doesn't really make a difference. It's a bit easier to go to events and do in-person networking if you're close to a center for that kind of stuff. But it really makes no material difference. Like, I know self-publishers from all over the world who it hasn't been any barrier. There was a couple of it's a little bit easier now in terms of when I started. I don't think you could publish direct with Kobo. You had to go via Smashwords. Right. And Barnes and Noble, I think only a couple of months ago, have finally opened their doors to Irish self-publishers. We were always forced to go via a distributor like Smashwords or Drafted Digital. And so in terms of things opening up, it's a little bit better now than it was. But even then, those were minor. They were more like speed bumps rather than any kind of obstacle.
Right.
Once you have a reasonable internet connection, you can self-publish from anywhere in the world pretty much.
Yeah. Are there any specific local communities where you are right now that have been beneficial for you lately?
Not so much. For me, most of the networking and most of the value I get interacting with other authors is done online. The Irish scene would still be very focused on literary fiction, very focused on traditional publishing.
Yeah.
And to the extent that when I went to join a professional writers organization here, when I moved back a couple of years ago, I wasn't considered a professional author, even though I'd been making a living from book sales since I think the end of 2012 was when I kind of officially went full time.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I wasn't like, if I'd have taken a deal with a small press over here and gotten, I don't know what a typical advance is here. It's quite small, like €500 or something like that. I would be then considered a professional author, but making a living from book sales didn't qualify me because it didn't go via a traditional publisher.
Yeah.
So the attitudes here are still quite a bit outdated, even though there's quite a few Irish self-publishers. I think we're all kind of scattered around and we don't really have kind of a local organization. There's a couple in England, like the Alliance of Independent Authors, will have quite a few Irish members, but nothing local to Ireland. And all the events, it's changing a little bit, but most of the events will either be, serious authors up on a stage reading literary fiction, or they'll be very much focused on like agent pitch sessions and things like that. There's nothing really here. There's not much here in terms of like a marketing focused conference or something specifically for self-publishers or career authors, really.
Got it. And so internationally then, what are the conferences that you say are worth traveling to for you right now?
Well, for me, I get most value from the American conferences, like NINC especially. For me, is the conference where you get the kind of highest level marketing focused information, which is what I'm most hungry for. There's another conference that I go to every year in York, and that one is actually much more focused on traditional publishing. It's very much for authors who are writing or have just written their first book, but it's a mixture between the kind of agent speed dating stuff and they do a lot of craft sessions, and you don't get a lot of that in the American conferences as much, not the self-publisher ones. So I like going there because they got really amazing craft teachers, and I always sneak in the back and just start filling notebooks at all the things that I haven't figured out yet.
And what's that one?
That's called the Festival of Writing. And it's on in York, which is such a wonderful location. It's always a good excuse to go over there every year. And there's a couple of smaller ones, like there's the International Women's Fiction Festival in Matera, which I know Kobo usually sends somebody to, and that's a great location, and often a good mix of authors there too. But in terms of like big self-publishing events or big events for like kind of career authors like NINC and RWA, there isn't so much in Europe. I'm hoping that'll change soon enough, but there isn't so much here at the moment.
Got it. So thinking about your career at the moment, you're really split kind of between the fiction and nonfiction side of things. And there are several influential authors in the indie community who are doing that. So Joanna Penn obviously has the podcast and the JF Penn Fiction, Mark Dawson, Michael Anderle. So what is it like to balance those two sides? It's almost like a dual personality situation. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, well, I don't do it as well as Joanna Penn anyway. That's that's for sure. I don't know if she even sleeps, to be quite honest with you. No, like I try to do both at the same time, and I know there's some people who are incredibly organized and they'll write like nonfiction in the morning and fiction in the afternoon. I can never get my brain to work like that. When I'm writing a novel, I have to devote myself to it fully. I have to block off time. I have to stop doing any kind of extracurricular activities and just trap myself in the writing cave and get into it. Otherwise, it's just I'm just too distractible. Nonfiction I can kind of squeeze in anywhere, but I think nonfiction it's a bit easier, quite frankly. There's less moving parts. Like you still have to deploy a few storytelling techniques to make the medicine go down, but it's just not, for me, it's not as much of a challenge as writing a novel. I find writing novels much harder and much more of a challenge, and I actually enjoy it more, and possibly because it's more of a challenge, I don't know. like it's funny, I never really intended to get into writing nonfiction. I wrote Let's Get Digital, thinking it would be the only nonfiction book I'd ever write, and including all the editions of that book, I think I've released 7 now, and I have another one kind of maybe going to pop out later in the year.
All right.
And probably another 1 or 2 after that, even though I keep thinking, like, every nonfiction book I write, I keep thinking it's going to be my last one, that I've said everything I can on the topic. But then, it's something, you always get the itch again. But for me, like, the last couple of years, I've been focusing mostly on nonfiction. I was kind of rebooting my career in many ways, and I decided to focus on the nonfiction side first. So I think I had 4 nonfiction releases in the last kind of just over a year. Yeah. And now I'm going to focus on fiction much more over the next couple of years. Yeah. And aside, I think that's a smarter move commercially as well. Like in some ways, nonfiction is easier to market, or it certainly is if you already have a platform focused on authors. In fiction, though, the ceiling for fiction is much higher. There's only so many copies of a nonfiction book you can sell, I think, before you hit that ceiling. But the ceiling for fiction is near infinite. And just taking a long-term view of my career, the nonfiction isn't as evergreen. So like a book like Let's Get Digital, when you're talking very much about tactics and self-publishing best practices, that goes out of date every 2-3 years. So yeah, I've been trying to think about writing things which are more evergreen, which don't need to get updated as frequently, because that's always a pain in the ass to do, quite frankly, to go back to any book that you consider finished and rewrite chapters. That's always like walking through treacle or something. But also in terms of, getting into something like the audio market, where you have much higher production costs than you do for ebooks, it makes more sense to have more evergreen content. Because if you're going to spend a few grand getting an audiobook produced, and you're writing something which is going to be out of date in 2 years, you're kind of shortening the window to make money out of it. So to me, it just, in pure mercenary terms, it makes more sense to, like, I think I've been focusing kind of 2/3 on nonfiction and 1/3 on fiction, and I should really flip that balance around. And so that's probably what I'm going to do going forward.
Yeah, makes sense. And I've heard that from other nonfiction writers as well, that challenge of updating it, the new editions. By the time you get the first one edited and out and marketed, it's almost time to rewrite it again.
Yeah, and writers are a very demanding audience. I think people are surprised who just write novels and they have a lot of success, and then they want to come and write a how-to book, and they move into this space. They get surprised about how demanding authors are as an audience. And I think with ebooks, it's kind of like a double-edged sword, where you might release a book, and then, like I just released a book on BookBub ads, and they made a major change a pretty major change to the platform, just as I was formatting the book. Yeah. And people will actually expect, like, even if the book is only out 2 days and there's a new development, they expect in a digital age that the book should auto update or something to take account of the very latest changes. Or they might think like, hey, look, it's just 1 paragraph in the book. Why don't you go and update it? And you could, but they're kind of forgetting what it's like to be a writer. As soon as you open that manuscript and you go to change 1 paragraph, another sentence will catch your eye, or there's something else you want to change. And all of a sudden you're 2 weeks later and you're fiddling around with a book that you've already shipped, and you should be moving on to the next one.
Right. Okay, so I see we're getting a couple questions in the comments, so let's pop into that quickly. Bruce said good morning. Good morning to you, Bruce, wherever you are. We wrote to ourselves to remind everybody to leave questions and comments. And Kelly has a question about gaining traction on Kobo specifically, so you can feel free to jump in on this one, and I can tackle anything that you don't feel you have the answer to. Yeah. But probably a common question, but many indie authors on various online forums say they can't get any traction on Kobo. I got back my rights on the Trad series, launched it indie, but find my sales low on Kobo despite Facebook advertising directly. Any advice?
Yeah, well, like, aside from the super obvious basic stuff of, just respecting your readers to the point where you do always include links to all the other retailers, I think sometimes authors can forget. But that's super basic. But that's the first step that some people kind of just slip up on. That aside, I would look, the first port of call, I think, would be the promotional tools that Kobo now offers on the dashboard. I think you should go through those. Like, I usually look at them once every month or two, and just go through and apply for everything. And I don't know, you might get accepted for 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 of them, I don't know. But those will all add up. And, you know, a lot of them are free, or for the ones that do cost money, the cost is pretty minimal. So I think that's a no-brainer. Just put it in your calendar to do it every couple of months, or I think Kobo emails out when there's a bunch of new promotional opportunities, and just jump in there and do it. The second thing is, well, paid advertising. Facebook is a bit hit and miss when it comes to targeting Kobo audiences. I don't think they have successfully kind of tagged Kobo readers in their system to the same extent as they have for some of the larger retailers. I think a far easier way to reach Kobo readers is with BookBub ads. And you don't have the same issues often with, like if you're doing a Kobo specific campaign on Facebook, sometimes it's difficult to get a big enough audience. Like I think Facebook, sometimes you need an audience of 10 or 20,000 people before the ad will even start serving properly. And sometimes that can be tricky, especially when you go outside the Canadian market and you're trying to target Kobo readers in somewhere like the UK or Australia or America. It can get a little trickier. It's much easier on BookBub to target Kobo authors in those markets. You don't need an audience of 20,000 people or so. I think you only need an audience of just over 1,000 people for an ad to serve on BookBub. So it's much easier to get into those smaller pockets of readers around the world. You can run campaigns specifically to target those smaller markets. Like you can target Canada, Australia, India as well. That's pretty tricky to get going. But I've had a bit of joy targeting Canada, Australia, America, and UK via BookBub ads.
Yeah. I've heard the same. And getting to that question of getting over that 1,000 hump just to start, you're totally net new. What's your advice to get from 0 to ad worthy?
In terms of building an audience, or in terms of getting sales going?
I guess both.
Okay. Well, one thing on just on the logistical side that you need to watch out for with BookBub ads is, and to make sure, because you might be first of all, you might be writing in a niche like, I don't know, steampunk or something, which isn't as big as epic fantasy perhaps, or you might be specifically trying to grow sales in Australia, for example, which is a smaller market. So sometimes I think it helps to either throw all your, like do one single campaign for Australia where you're throwing in all the retailers together to ensure that the audience is big enough where you can actually get the ad to serve. And you know, you might only serve a little bit in Kobo Australia itself, but what I find is there's less those markets like Kobo Australia or Kobo UK, they're often a bit more deal starved in the sense they're not quite as saturated as, you know, Amazon America or Barnes and Noble America or Apple. And markets like Australia, books are often more expensive because they have import taxes. They just have a smaller number of titles coming to market, and there's all sorts of geographical and territorial reasons why books can be more expensive in a territory like that. So when they see a free book or 99-cent deals, the engagement levels can be amazing. Like you can have an ad which might be getting, I don't know, something like a 2% CTR in America or in some of the bigger retailers, and then you point that ad at Kobo Australia customers, and you can see a CTR of like 5 or 6 or 7%. And all that means that, you know, your clicks are going to be much cheaper. You're not burning through your audiences as fast, and they can be very responsive markets.
Great, awesome advice. From a Kobo perspective, the only thing I would add to that is just probably to check the promos more frequently if your goal is very specific to Kobo, because we are updating them. So every 2 weeks, if you're willing and getting into the nitty gritty, is probably a good cadence. And if you're not, trying to experiment with putting a book at free, even if for a limited time, if you have a back catalog, which it sounds like, Kelly, you do, is worth it to try to gain some traction.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there's a few promotions out there where you can engage in mailing list builders which are specific for the non-Amazon retailers or for wide authors, and you should look at some of those as well, because, you know, once you start, the thing about being non-exclusive or being a wide author is it's often a slower build, and sometimes people don't give it long enough before they decide to try exclusivity again or something like that. And you have to realize that, you know, it takes a little while to build it up, and you should definitely like lean on the things that that are to your advantage. And one of those things definitely is free. Like perma-free has been a tactic that has been working since I started in self-publishing in 2011. It's a tried and true tactic, and it's an advantage that you have over authors who aren't wide and exclusive, that you have the freedom to put your book free whenever you like, or to keep it free permanently. And that's something that audiences everywhere are responsive to.
Yep, completely agreed. So getting into the comments again, I see Nathan, hey, and saying hi to two of his favorite people, and you are one of ours. Nathan took David flying in Florida, risky move, but they both lived to tell the tale.
We did, yes. That's a very, very small plane. I didn't feel safe at all.
It might have been the beers that you had before, though.
Yeah.
Hard to say.
Didn't help.
Peter says hi, and Cami has a question. I'd love to hear your take on Facebook ads. Is it still worth it, especially with Facebook changing its algorithm every now and then?
Yeah, I noticed that a lot of people have been kind of down on Facebook ads lately, and people might expect me to join in the chorus there because I'm trying to hawk a book on BookWeb ads, but that's not my experience. To be honest with you, I haven't seen much impact over the last I haven't seen much variance in my CPCs or CTRs overall in the last 18 months to 2 years. I'm not seeing what I know other people are reporting that, and I don't doubt that they're having some issues, but I personally haven't experienced it. And I've been running big marketing campaigns for a few other authors in a couple of different genres, and I haven't seen it via their campaigns either. Now, this could be just a genre thing, because I've been working mostly in kind of nonfiction, historical fiction, science fiction, and I haven't seen that. And it could totally be the case that romance is a different ball game. It often is, but that hasn't been my experience. And so I've heard people as well saying that Facebook are further throttling engagement, organic engagement from pages, and that it's really becoming pay to play. And again, that's not something that I've experienced. I think they're becoming stricter on. People always complain that Facebook kind of breaks something and then sell you the solution, but I think they forget how many pages that we actually like, how many friends that we have, how many updates people are posting every day. There's 1.5 billion people log into Facebook every day, but that newsfeed can only fit so much. And if everyone's got 100 friends or 1,000 friends, and if everyone has liked 200 different pages, and if you think everyone is posting at least once a day, that's a lot of stuff to fit in the feed. So they physically can't fit it in. So they have to prioritize some of it. So obviously they have to make money as well. It's not a charity. So they're going to reserve some of those slots for ads. But I think it's just made the kind of the basics of Facebook and the fundamentals of social media that you have to lean on those even stronger. I think there's a danger of kind of just sharing kind of cat pictures and easy memes, getting kind of cheap and easy clicks, because everyone likes that stuff, and that will hoover up the clicks and engagement, but you're not really building a core audience for your niche via that kind of easier, kind of low-hanging fruit content. And if you spend a little bit of time, if it's worth it for you, this isn't something you necessarily have to do to be successful, but if Facebook is a part of your strategy, I think it's worth spending a bit of time thinking about your content marketing strategy, thinking about the kind of content that your audience exclusively likes, not the kind of content that everyone responds to. I think there's a danger in sharing that kind of content. But if you just strictly stick to the content that your audience likes and that they exclusively like, and if it repels everyone else, that's actually a good thing. And then you'll find that your organic reach is still quite good. I'm much better at this with nonfiction than with my historical fiction, but with my nonfiction author page, I'm still sometimes get organic reach on a post without boosting it, without throwing any money at it, of up to 30-35%. And that's supposedly impossible. But it's because if you look at my author page, I have a very kind of narrow band of content that I put out there. And I think you've just got to embrace those fundamentals more closely, and then you won't have to spend as much on ads. It's great reaching people for free.
I think those are all really good points. And we advertise our brand on Facebook as well, and I find sometimes it's like a big hammer approach to trying to keep spam and stuff out of there, but I also find them to be very reactive. If I get flagged for an ad for some totally ludicrous reason and you appeal it, it usually goes up pretty quickly, or at least that's what I've seen.
Yeah, it can be a bit hit and miss. I think some of it depends on how many likes you have or how much you're spending. You might get slightly better customer service, I find, with a lot of these companies.
Good point. And Nathan chimed in with a great joke. Watch out, writers. David's knocking you right in your low-hanging fruit. He also invited me onto the plane, and seriously, just thinking about that makes my palms sweat. I really don't like flying, so I don't know that that would be the best situation for any of us, but I have a couple months to think about it. So
well, maybe it's like that, you know, when someone has a fear of snakes and they kind of cover them in snakes, and then they're supposed to feel better afterwards. I'm not sure how that works exactly.
I don't know. Okay, so Bruce has a question, which is, I found that targeting on Facebook is difficult because they won't let you target indie authors. It's a really good point. In some genres, such as UF, PNR, majority of the big hitters are indie. Any suggestions for trying to solve that problem?
Well, I think this comes down to in kind of knowing the quirks of each individual ad platform and kind of leaning into them rather than fighting them. So just to contrast with BookBub for a second, like BookBub, if you're running BookBub ads and you're trying to advertise a full price book, it's not impossible, but it's very difficult, because if you think about where your ad usually appears, it's in the middle of a load of deals. And if the likes of J.K. Rowling and Stephen King are selling a book for $1.99 or 99 cents, and then you're trying to sell one for $4.99, that's a tough sell. It's not impossible. It can be done, but it's pretty hard to do. So I always like to focus BookBub on promoting discounts and deals. Mm-hmm. With Facebook, I find one of the strengths of Facebook, it's the opposite of, it's different to every other platform in that it's almost a fundamental of digital advertising that drilling down and being more granular with your targeting gets you better results. Mm-hmm. Facebook is a little different. Sometimes attacking a broader audience can work really well. And right. What I find with Facebook ads, if you can get it like a comp author who is either a giant trad author or a giant indie, which are usually the only ones you can target on Facebook. It's not like BookBub where you can target every author in the universe. Facebook is usually only the very big authors. And they're the kind of ones, if you target them on BookBub, you will absolutely crash and burn. Right. But on Facebook, sometimes if you have well-optimized ads and good images and good copy in your ad text, you can just slowly chew through this audience of a giant trad author in a way that is very, very hard to do on other platforms. Mm-hmm. So I think one of the problems with Facebook and one of the problems with talking about Facebook is that everyone has quite a different experience advertising on Facebook. Like, for example, a romance author, they usually have a much easier time in targeting by author. There's a lot more romance authors for one reason or another in the database that you can target and get reasonable results with. Right. In other genres, like, for example, in science fiction, there's very few authors. Like if you write space opera or military science fiction, something like that, there's very few authors that you can target. Mm-hmm. And so when a romance author says, Facebook ads are easy, I just target all my comp authors and let the ads run, they're speaking the truth, but it's not a best practice that you can apply necessarily to another genre. So then you often have to kind of take a roundabout view of it, and you can either target by your genre directly. That works sometimes, and if neither of those things work, if you can't target any of your comp authors, if you can't target your genre directly, I wouldn't give up on Facebook. There are other ways to unearth your audience, but it's going to be a longer and harder road. You're going to have to develop your own custom audiences. Yeah. You're either going to have to work the pixel on your website, or you're going to have to be feeding it your email list and retargeting based on that. And this would be actually my favorite approach for anyone who can't target by genre or by author, is to roll out a content marketing strategy on your page and use small amounts of money to boost that content to the kind of wider, let's say you are a science fiction author, to the wider science fiction audience, especially if you've got a bit of video you can throw into the mix, because some of those clicks are very cheap, or if there's any kind of photo-based content, because Facebook wants to keep traffic on its site, like all social networks. It wants to keep the traffic on its site. So if you post something on Facebook which doesn't lead people away from Facebook, if it's not a link to Amazon or to Barnes & Noble, if it's just like a photograph, often that would be a lot cheaper way of showing something to a broader audience. Right. So that kind of content boosted to the wider audience, and then anyone who interacts with that content, anyone who comments or likes or shares it, like Facebook will actually store that information, and you can run an engagement ad. So you can do a bit of remarketing where, so when it does come around to the time when you have a 99-cent sale or a free promo, you can retarget all the people who interacted with that content previously. And then you're slowly building up a file of people who've expressed an interest in your posts and your ads. And that will, even if you are able to target by author and by genre, ultimately your most valuable audiences will be the custom ones you develop yourself. So if you can't target by author or by genre, just you've got to bite the bullet and start developing your own custom audiences. You're going to have to do that ultimately anyway, or you will want to do that because it's so valuable. So you're just skipping the first couple of steps and going straight to the harder stuff. But it's worth it ultimately.
Love it. Amazing. So that fully answered the question. And before we move into the next one, which is about pricing, I wanted to get a benchmark from your perspective on what budgets look like for indie authors right now for advertising in a successful way. There's a couple ways I could think about approaching that question for like somebody brand new to the scene, breaking it up by genre, what percentage of your income you should be aiming to spend on ads. What do you think is the best way to think about that from an author when they're thinking about their marketing budget?
I actually wouldn't recommend spending on ads in the first instance when you're starting out, which I think a lot of people might be surprised to hear me say that. But I think there's cheaper clicks out there. Like if you're starting off on a shoestring budget, which I think most people starting out will be, I think there's cheaper clicks out there than you can get with paid advertising. Like you can take out an ad, like not BookBub obviously, because I think an author just releasing their first book with a few reviews is unlikely to get a BookBub featured deal. But there are many smaller sites who do a similar thing to BookBub, and like if you just look on a cost per download basis or a cost per click basis, you're going to get the cheapest clicks out there are probably sites like BookBub aside, are probably sites like eReader News Today, Robin Reads, and then there's various specialty ones in different genres like Book Barbarian for sci-fi and fantasy, and there's a bunch of romance specific ones. I think if you're on a limited budget, I would recommend using those sites first because they are the cheapest clicks out there. Now, they'll only get you so far. Like you're only going to get so many downloads or so many sales, even from advertising on all the recommended sites simultaneously. And then after that, once your budget grows beyond, like, because those sites are very cheap, I should point out. Some of them are $20, $25. I think the most expensive of them maybe goes up to $75 or something. So it should be within the range of most people. And there's even a few then that don't charge at all, but you're not guaranteed of getting selected. But yeah, there is something there for pretty much every budget, and I would start with those first. And then when you have a couple more books out, when you have a little bit more experience, when things like your presentation is more nailed down, your blurbs, and you have a few more reviews, I think that's the time then to look at paid advertising and to start looking at the three major ad platforms and exploring what they can do for your books.
Mm-hmm. Great. So jumping from that into pricing, David Bradwell asks, what are your feelings on discounting a book at launch in order to generate initial sales? And I've seen that trend actually on the rise.
Yeah, I've tried pretty much everything at this point. I've tried 99-cent book launches. I've tried full price, everything in between. With some of my books, I haven't been very aggressive in discounting them, and others, I have been quite aggressive. And I've also had the opportunity to work with a bunch of authors and compare different strategies. And it really depends. It really depends on, like, a lot depends on your genre. A lot depends on what your particular goals are. A lot depends on how many books you have out and where you are and what you're trying to achieve just in the short term. And just to give you a couple of examples, like if you've only got one book out and your next book probably isn't coming for a while, if it's not coming for another year or two, I don't think it makes very much sense to do like a 99-cent launch, because I think being very aggressive with price at launch is something you should only really do if you've got more books coming very soon. Mm-hmm. Like it's kind of difficult. Like if you're doing a very aggressive launch where you're dropping the price that low, it's usually so you can build up an audience quickly. Mm-hmm. But you want to maintain the interest with that audience. You don't want to keep them. Someone who buys your book for 99-cent and then you're trying to keep them interested via your mailing list for 2 years until the next one comes out. Right. I don't think that strategy is going to really work, because you're probably going to lose money on a 99-cent launch. Certainly in terms of in the immediate sense. You know, during that launch week or whatever, if you're spending money on ads, if you're booking promotions, you've also got to make back the price of your cover and your editing and all your production costs. So a 99-cent launch probably isn't going to do that for you. But it can be very useful if you're using it to build something bigger. Like, let's say you are an established author who's moving into another niche, or if you're launching, maybe you've just wrapped up like a 6-book series and you're starting a new one, and you want to bring over a lot of your existing readers and really get them to try it during launch week, so you can get the ball rolling on a new series. Then it can be very effective, but only usually if you've got another book coming in the next 1 to 3 months. I think if you're doing it like I did it on I did a 99-cent launch on a standalone when I didn't release something in that genre for another year or two. Like, don't do that. That didn't work at all. So I think it'll work as part of a plan. And I worry when I hear people asking questions like that, what kind of divorce from context. I think the context is very important. I think you should think about what your goals are, what you've got coming out next. When is this series going to be completed? When is it likely? The next book, when is that going to come out? And then start thinking about which of these tactics is going to work for you. Should you be launching at $2.99, $4.99? Should you be putting it free? Like, when should you do that? How far down the line should you do that? Yeah. So I would come at it the kind of other way, if you know what I mean.
Completely, and I 100% agree. Have a marketing strategy based on what you have in your toolbox and what you're hoping to achieve with those tools, versus just throwing money into the machine and hoping for the best. Yeah,
and a lot of people who are doing those very aggressive launches, like they do have a very specific plan, and they have been working on it kind of silently in the background for a while. Like a lot of people, like you might see someone releasing 3 books in 3 months, and you're wondering like how they're doing it. But often it's the case they've been banking that content for 6 months or maybe even longer, and then it's only when all 3 books are written that they start releasing them one after the other. And in that kind of scenario, launching at 99 cent can work really well and really kind of jumpstart the momentum of a series. But I wouldn't do it in isolation. I do it for a specific reason.
Yeah, like all marketing tactics should be, ideally.
Yeah.
So Cami, a question just popped up, which I've been hearing also quite a lot. Authors who've been in this indie game for a while and have a substantial backlist now are hoping to keep that backlist evergreen and try to market them now. I would say from my perspective, one of the biggest challenges is thinking about, do you need new covers? That's a common issue where if you started at this 10 years ago and haven't done a refresh, that might be one thing to start. What else do you think about from a marketing perspective?
Yeah, well, I think, I talk about this a lot in Strangers, the Superfans, actually, because I think when sales will always slide. They always decay. It's like the third law of publishing dynamics or something, that, like all books tend towards entropy, and all authors, I guess, at some point. But what I would say is, you can always, revive a book sales by putting together a promotion. But I think there's kind of a danger when we see the sales kind of flag on a title, especially if they've flagged like it's not just a blip and they're actually heading down, or they have been down for a while and we're looking to restart them. Often we just reach for the pocketbook and just start throwing traffic at a book, when that mightn't be the reason that that book sales aren't doing what you hope they should be doing. And often there is a problem somewhere else. It could be in the packaging, like the cover, or the price might be out of line with certain trends in your category at the moment. Your description mightn't be good enough. There's a variety of different things that could be wrong with the book. Like, you could be in the wrong categories. Your metadata, like I think it was when I was transitioning some books from CreateSpace to KDP Print, I hadn't looked at the metadata of a couple of titles since 2011. Right. And I was looking at my keywords, and I was really embarrassed. I was like, I'm supposed to be an expert on this, and this is absolutely awful. I think I just, I hadn't even considered what keywords I was going to put on a book until I was uploading it. And, I was trying to make sure the formatting was right and everything. Right. And I was like, oh, sugar, keywords. I haven't even thought of them. And I just put in 7 random words that had nothing to do with my book. So yeah, don't do that either. But yeah, like look at your metadata, because, like the retailers are often switching up their category selection. Like sometimes they axe old categories, they bring in new ones. Sometimes you might want to just make sure that you're maximizing your footprint everywhere you can, and that your book is as discoverable as it should be, and that it's not in the wrong categories either. Like I it just seems that we're wheeling out all my mistakes. I, for a while with my historical fiction, I was trying to put it into kind of action adventure kind of categories, because those markets seemed bigger to me, and it seemed like they'd gone digital faster than kind of straight historical fiction. But that was a mistake, because that wasn't my audience. And so even if I was able to put together a promotion and become visible to those readers, they would either not buy it because it wasn't like Clive Cussler at all. It wasn't the kind of book they were looking for, or they would buy it and they would give it a poor review, or they wouldn't sign up to my list, or otherwise want to read something by me again. So you don't want to do that. You only want to target, exclusively aim at your core audience, the core readers in your niche. And there's no point being visible or marketing to people outside of that, and it can ultimately hurt you too.
Sure. Great advice, as always. So I just want to remind people who are listening, we got 10 minutes left if you have final questions, to get them up now.
But just on the cover thing that you kind of opened that with, I think, it was another author that said this to me, that she changes the covers on her books, I think, every 18 months or 2 years, and not just to capture any maybe new trends in the niche. She said it was almost like a refresh for her internally, where she felt like she was sick of looking at a book cover after, she'd been writing it, and then she always ordered the covers before she even starts a book, so she has something to kind of aim for, and so she'd be looking at this book cover for like 2 years now, and she's just sick of looking at it. And so when she comes to put together a backlist promotion to try and revive sales in that book, she's kind of just tired of looking at it, and she just doesn't have any kind of ideas. But then when she gets a new cover for the book, it feels like a new book to her, and she gets excited about it again, and all of a sudden she's more creative in terms of putting together some marketing for it.
That's really cool, and I could see myself feeling that way too.
Yeah, totally.
A little bit addictive. It's like getting a new tattoo or something, but it makes you want to get another one. But it really can refresh your whole series, and inevitably your branding and covers will hopefully be improving across the series. So if you're getting into book 14, 15, take a look back at the early ones and make sure they still match, and it's a cohesive series for a new person coming to you today.
Yeah, totally. And I think we can fall into the trap sometimes of thinking that we've saturated the audience for a book. You never really do, like unless it's a terrible book, and then one reader, you've probably saturated the audience for that book. But in general, like, unless it's really, really super niche stuff, you never really saturate the audience for a book. Like, look how many people still buy Harry Potter, or there's another author I know in science fiction who had a massive hit with a book in 2013. I think it was one of the biggest selling books of the year. And he's just back in the top 100 with it again. And you're thinking like he sold millions and millions of copies of that book. Like, how are there more readers for it? But, they make new readers every day. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, if you think also just of retailers as business, we're obviously trying to get new customers every single day. So those are people who might be totally new to ebooks today in 2019, or a new country that reads primarily in English, just discovering ebooks and ready to discover yours.
Yeah, like it's entirely possible that the tactics you were using to promote a book have become a bit tired, and there certainly is a danger of going back to the same well over and over again. Like if you take out an ad on eReader News Today or Robin Reads or something, and then you run and you do the same promotion again 2 months later and take out another ad in the same place again, you're going to see massively dwindling returns on that. But if you freshen up your tactics, like if you go between using free and using 99¢, or doing deeper discounts across the series, or just switching up the venue, like trying to get into Facebook ads or switching over to BookBub ads, there's always new readers to find for any book, I find.
Yeah. So I saw a comment the other day in the forum that maybe BookBub featured ads are the next big gatekeeper. Getting those rejections is like the new badge of honor for rejection letters. I wanted to throw that by you and see how you feel about that.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I was just on a podcast yesterday evening, and I was saying, like, it's funny how life goes full circle, where they have, when you're applying for a featured deal at BookBub, they have this comment box there, and if you've got a better chance of getting accepted if you really work that comment box and really pimp your book, and if anything you can put in there to try and help them say yes. you know, like if you can mention it was, you know, nominated for an award, or you know, if it's part of a big marketing plan, or what, anything you can do to improve your chance of getting selected. And I just realized not too long ago that it's kind of like writing a query again.
Yeah,
you know, you're trying to tell them what the book is about, and you know, all your little achievements and stuff, and you know, like you thought you were done with that, but you know, everybody's got to serve somebody, right?
Yeah. But obviously the banner ads are much more democratic in the auction approach than those featured deals, if potentially less lucrative in the short term.
Yeah, like nothing will match you know, the cost per click or the cost per download that you get with a BookBub featured deal. Like nothing will match that, and it's hard to conceive of anything which could ever even come into the same bracket. But yeah, even if you are somebody who always gets accepted by BookBub, you'll only get featured maximum once a month, you know. And I think even the people who do get accepted the most over there, they wouldn't even get featured that regularly, because of course they want to show fresh books and authors to their own audience all the time. Whereas, and it's not something you can control. You can't control getting accepted. You can't really control what date you get picked on. Whereas with the self-serve platform, there's no curation in that. Anybody can run a campaign whenever they like. So you can reach that audience whenever you like. You can you can obviously do it on whatever date you wish. The cost of the clicks and downloads are going to be greater than a featured deal. There's no avoiding that. But you can still, if you take some time to like really test your ads and test your author targets and test your images, so that you found the kind of image that your audience really responds to, and you can get those clicks down quite cheap. Like I regularly run campaigns on BookBub now where I can get clicks for 20-25 cents, and the thing about BookBub is that their audience converts like nobody else. Like the conversion rate I see typically on BookBub ads is about 25%, sometimes 30%. Sometimes with really much smaller authors, I can get it even as high as 50%, which is crazy.
Wow.
Like the best I will get on a Facebook ad might be 15 or 20%.
Right.
And then AMS is much lower again, so more like 5%.
Yeah.
So BookBub, that is incredibly valuable to be able in 2019 to be able to get clicks that cheaply and have them convert at that rate. For me, at the moment, gives it the edge over everywhere else.
Yeah. We've got 4 minutes left. So in terms of BookBub ads, highly recommend checking out your latest book and signing up for your newsletter, where you share the latest updates on that, because even when your advice is specific to BookBub, in the case of that book, the logic and the best practices apply to any kind of marketing that you might be doing. So I highly recommend that everybody checks that out if you haven't yet.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there are things that you can definitely translate across the platforms. Like definitely the fundamentals of digital marketing are almost always universal. But I think one place where people get tripped up is fighting against the quirks too much. You know, I talked about that a little earlier, but I think you've really got to, like the number one question I get all the time about the first thing people ask with BookBub ads is, you know, can I advertise a full price book? And you can, but you know, that's like trying to jump straight to black belt, you know, when it's your first day in the dojo. You know, I would start with deals and discounts, and this goes for any ad platform at all. Try and understand what the quirks are, and then try and lean into them rather than rowing against them.
Yep. Yeah, it's like a patience young grasshopper situation.
Yeah, totally.
Peter says he's drowning in information and has to head out. Thank you for joining us, Peter. And in our last 3 minutes, is there anything else that's really top of mind, or not necessarily trends, because, you know, when in a couple months' time, if somebody's watching this, the trend might be gone, but just things that you think authors should be keeping in mind in terms of growing their sales and staying motivated to keep succeeding? Yeah,
well, I think, you know, I think the next big thing I think we've all got to tackle, and I talked about it a little bit in Strangers to Superfans, but I think I think that's kind of the first shot in you know, really drilling down into the whole area of reader targeting, not just in terms of who we're pointing our ads at, and not just in terms of, you know, how we package our books and how we present ourselves to readers on social media and the description of our books, but like the whole thing is a spectrum for me. We're like right from the tropes in the story, like that you're hitting those all the time, and you're getting, you know, because I see some books and it's almost like magic. They just get sticky in the charts, and you're like, what are they doing? Are they running $1,000 of Facebook ads a day? And you find that they're not advertising at all. You're like, and it seems like some kind of magic. But for me, like those really breakout bestseller hits, it's where everything is acting like in perfect unison, like some kind of like Welsh choir or something, where like every element, like there's not one note of dissonance at all. And you see some authors do this, like you see their bio, even their author bio is written perfectly in their voice. Like and every single element from their promo graphics to their branding to their world building to the tropes, their characters, all the way down to their Facebook ads and everything is just in perfect harmony. And I think getting that right. So like I think the next big trend, if you like, is not something new. It's not going to be hollow books or some new advertising platform. It's really drilling down and just being good at everything simultaneously, if that's not too much of a challenge for everyone out there. But yeah, just trying to make sure that all the parts fit together and kind of taking a holistic view of how you're reaching readers, right from the story all the way to the advertising.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for that and for taking the time to join us today and sharing so much expertise. I feel like we covered a lot of ground, which is so cool.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, and for those of you who shared your lunch hour or your dinner hour with us today, we appreciate your time. And we will look through the comments and randomly give someone a copy of Strangers to Superfans, which is obviously a great read. But for those of you who want to find out more about David, davidgaughran.com is the best place to find you. And I highly recommend signing up for the newsletter because it's not only hilarious, but highly informative.
Yeah, and the newsletter goes out every Friday, and we cover all sorts of marketing topics, all the different ad platforms, and all different ways of reaching readers.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks again, David.
All right.
Bye.